Good morning, everyone. It is a curious thing, isn't it? To find oneself isolated, separated from the crowd, removed from the usual hum of life, as though the world has moved on while you stand still. It is a state we do not often seek, nor one we easily understand. Yet, perhaps it is in these very moments of solitude that we are given the chance to hear the deepest truths about ourselves and the world around us. Today, I wish to share with you something that, though difficult to grasp at first, may ultimately bring clarity and peace to those who, like many of us, find themselves in seasons of isolation. The idea is simple yet profound that God isolates us, not to abandon us, but for a purpose far greater than we can immediately see. It is a difficult thought to embrace, for we are creatures of connection, of relationship, and of shared experience. To be alone, especially when we feel that we have much to give, can seem like a punishment, a cruel twist of fate. But as we will come to understand, this isolation may well be the very thing that prepares us for something more, something greater. Let us then approach this idea with an open heart, willing to entertain the possibility that God, in His wisdom, has a reason for placing us in these quiet, often uncomfortable spaces, and perhaps, in the stillness, we will begin to discover the voice that calls us to something deeper, something transformative. Let us explore together the truth that in our moments of isolation, we are never truly alone. Isolation can often feel like abandonment, a void where our cries for connection seem to go unheard. Yet, what if this solitude is not a punishment, but a carefully orchestrated part of a divine plan? There is a profound truth in the idea that God isolates us not to harm us, but to prepare us for something greater. This period of separation, though painful and bewildering, serves a purpose beyond our immediate understanding. When we are surrounded by the noise and busyness of life, it becomes challenging to hear the whispers of God. Our minds are cluttered with distractions, and our hearts are pulled in countless directions. Isolation removes these barriers. It strips away the superficial and places us in a position where we must confront our inner selves. In this vulnerable state, we begin to see what truly matters. We are forced to grapple with questions about who we are, what we believe, and where we are headed. It is in this crucible of solitude that God starts to work deeply within us. Consider the way a sculptor works on a block of marble. Before the masterpiece can emerge, the artist must chip away the unnecessary pieces. This process is neither gentle nor easy, but it is essential. Similarly, when God isolates us, He is chiseling away the fears, doubts, and dependencies that hold us back. The quiet times are His workshop, where He molds our character and strengthens our faith. Isolation also provides a space for growth that might not occur otherwise. Like a seed planted deep within the earth, we might feel buried, forgotten, and left in the dark. Yet it is in this darkness that the roots grow strongest, stretching deep into the soil to draw nourishment. Without this stage, the seed could never rise above the surface to bear fruit. In the same way, our moments of isolation are often the foundation for the greatest growth in our lives. Throughout history, those called to great purposes have often experienced isolation. Moses spent years in the wilderness before leading his people to freedom. David, anointed as king, endured years hiding in caves before ascending to the throne. Even Jesus sought solitude in the desert, fasting and praying before beginning his ministry. These moments of separation were not wasted, they were integral to the journey. Isolation is not the absence of God, it is His invitation to come closer. In the silence He speaks. In the loneliness He reassures. And in the stillness He prepares us for the tasks and blessings that lie ahead. The key is to trust Him in the process, even when we cannot see the outcome. When the period of isolation ends, you will find yourself changed, stronger, and more aligned with His purpose. What seemed like a time of loss will reveal itself as a season of preparation, a step forward in a plan that was always for your good. Trust in this, and let the silence refine you. Life often feels chaotic and full of distractions, pulling us in countless directions and masking the essence of who we truly are. In moments of isolation, when we are stripped of the noise and company we depend on, it can seem like life has unraveled. But what if this solitude is not an accident, but an intentional act of divine craftsmanship? Just as a sculptor works quietly and carefully on a block of marble, God isolates us to create something beautiful and purposeful from within us. Imagine a sculptor standing before a massive block of unshaped stone. To the untrained eye, it looks plain, unremarkable, and unworthy of attention. But the sculptor sees more than stone. Beneath the rough surface, they envision a masterpiece. Every strike of the chisel is intentional, every removal of marble purposeful, and every cut moves closer to revealing the hidden beauty within. However, this process requires the block to be alone, set apart from other distractions, so the sculptor can focus entirely on the transformation. Similarly, when God isolates us, it is not to harm or abandon us, but to refine and reveal the potential He placed within us. The process is neither easy nor painless. The sculptor's tools cut, chip, and hammer at the stone, breaking away layers that seem permanent. In the same way, God's shaping process during isolation often feels uncomfortable. We may experience the loss of relationships, opportunities, or comforts we once relied on. Yet these removals are not arbitrary. They are purposeful acts meant to strip away the parts of us that do not serve the vision God has for our lives. Pride, fear, impatience, and reliance on temporary things must be chipped away so that the essence of who we are, the person God designed us to be, can shine through. This process also requires immense patience. A masterpiece is not created overnight, and neither are we. The sculptor may spend weeks, months, or even years working on a single piece, often focusing on the smallest details that might go unnoticed by others. God, too, works with the same meticulous care. In our isolation, we may feel forgotten or wonder why progress feels so slow. Yet, like the sculptor, God is shaping us with precision and love, ensuring that every part of us aligns with His ultimate design. Isolation, then, is not abandonment but preparation. It is a sacred time when God, as the master sculptor, devotes His attention to shaping us. He uses this solitude to teach us lessons we could not learn in the noise and busyness of the world. It is a time to draw closer to Him, to trust in His vision, and to surrender to His process. When the sculpting is complete, the masterpiece is unveiled for all to see. What once appeared as an ordinary block of stone now reflects beauty, purpose, and intention. Similarly, when God's work in us is revealed, it will testify to His skill and love. Trust the process, even when it hurts, for the sculptor's hands are steady, and His vision is always good. Growth often begins in the most unlikely of places. Just as a seed must be buried deep in the earth to take root, so too are we sometimes placed in seasons of darkness to grow. It is in these times of obscurity and solitude, when the world seems to have moved on without us, that the most profound transformation takes place. Though the experience may feel isolating, the darkness is not a place of abandonment, but a fertile ground for development and strength. When a seed is planted, it does not immediately see the light. Instead, it is surrounded by soil, hidden from the world, and left to endure the weight of the earth above it. Yet this apparent burial is not an act of destruction, but one of preparation. Beneath the surface, the seed begins its work. Its shell cracks open, and roots stretch deep into the soil, anchoring it and drawing the nutrients it needs to thrive. This phase is crucial. Without it, the seed could not grow into a strong and resilient plant. In the same way, our periods of darkness are not meant to destroy us, but to strengthen our foundation. It is in these unseen moments that we develop the roots, faith, resilience, and character that will sustain us when we eventually rise. Darkness often brings discomfort, because it strips away the distractions and comforts we rely on. In the absence of light, we are forced to rely on something deeper within ourselves. This is where true growth begins. It is not in moments of ease, but in times of challenge that we discover our inner strength. The darkness pushes us to confront our fears, question our assumptions, and lean into the unknown. Though it feels like a place of loss, it is a space of becoming. Consider the many examples in nature that follow this pattern. A caterpillar must enter the cocoon, a dark and confined space, before it can emerge as a butterfly. The transformation within the cocoon is hidden from sight, but it is here that the miracle occurs. What was once a creature bound to the earth is reshaped into something capable of flight. The darkness is not the end of its story, but the beginning of its new life. The same principle applies to us. The challenges and struggles we face in the darkness often prepare us for the purpose and opportunities that lie ahead. When we feel buried by the weight of our circumstances, it is vital to remember that we are not buried, we are planted. Growth takes time, and the process is not always visible. But in the silence and obscurity, something beautiful is taking shape. When the time comes, the seed breaks through the soil, reaching toward the light. It stands tall, a testament to the work done in the unseen. Our growth in darkness is no different. It prepares us to rise stronger and more vibrant than before, ready to fulfill the purpose for which we were created. Trust the process, for even in darkness there is growth. In the chaos of life, it is easy to miss the subtle but powerful ways in which God speaks to us. We are surrounded by noise, expectations, distractions, and the constant hum of activity. Yet God's voice is rarely found in the clamor. It comes not as a shout or a grand display, but as a whisper, a still, small voice meant to be heard in the quiet of our hearts. Listening to this voice requires more than just the absence of noise. It demands intentional stillness and trust. Throughout history, God has used the still, small voice to guide, comfort, and direct his people. In the story of Elijah, we find a profound example. After fleeing for his life, Elijah sought refuge in a cave, consumed by fear and despair. He longed for God to speak, to provide clarity and reassurance. A mighty wind tore through the mountains, followed by an earthquake and then a fire. Yet God was not in any of these powerful displays. Instead, his presence was revealed in a gentle whisper. It was in this stillness that Elijah encountered the divine. This story teaches us something profound. God does not always meet us in the dramatic or the extraordinary. More often, he comes to us in moments of quiet, when our hearts are open and our minds are free from distraction. But in a world that values speed and volume, listening for this still, small voice requires effort. It means carving out time for silence, stepping away from the demands of daily life, and tuning our spirits to his presence. The still, small voice often speaks through our intuition, our conscience, or a sudden sense of peace in the midst of uncertainty. It can come through scripture, the words of a trusted friend, or the quiet moments of reflection where we sense his guidance. Yet this voice is easy to overlook. It does not compete for our attention. It waits patiently for us to seek it out. Listening to this voice is an act of faith. It requires trusting that God is speaking, even when his voice feels faint or difficult to discern. It also requires humility, acknowledging that our plans and desires may need to be set aside to follow his leading. But when we attune ourselves to his voice, we begin to experience the profound peace and clarity that only he can provide. The still, small voice often reveals itself most clearly in seasons of solitude. When we are isolated, stripped of distractions, and alone with our thoughts, we are better able to hear the gentle whispers of God. These whispers may not always bring the answers we seek, but they bring reassurance that we are not alone and that he is working in ways we cannot yet see. Learning to listen to the still, small voice is a lifelong journey. It is a practice of quieting our hearts and trusting that God speaks not in the roar of the storm, but in the quiet of the soul. In that quiet, we find the guidance, comfort, and presence we need to move forward with faith. Solitude can feel like an unwelcome companion, especially in a world that glorifies constant interaction and busyness. Yet there is a profound strength that emerges when we embrace solitude, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity. It is in these quiet moments, when we are alone with our thoughts and emotions, that we discover the depth of our resilience and the power of our inner resources. Solitude, rather than isolating us, often connects us to the very essence of who we are and what we are capable of becoming. In solitude, the distractions of the world fade away, leaving space for reflection and self-discovery. It is here that we confront our fears, acknowledge our weaknesses, and uncover our strengths. This process is neither easy nor comfortable, but it is transformative. Without the constant noise of external validation or comparison, we begin to understand our worth and purpose from within. We learn to rely not on the opinions of others, but on the quiet confidence that grows when we face life's challenges alone. History and literature are filled with examples of individuals who found strength in solitude. Consider the figures who retreated into the wilderness or sought periods of isolation to prepare for their greatest challenges. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before leading his people to freedom. Jesus sought solitude to pray and strengthen his spirit before facing the cross. These moments apart were not escapes from reality but preparations for it. In solitude, they found clarity, courage, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Solitude teaches us to listen. In the silence, we hear the whispers of our own hearts and the still, small voice of God. This voice may guide, comfort, or challenge us, but it always seeks to draw us closer to truth. When we learn to listen deeply, we gain insight that cannot be found in the noise of everyday life. Solitude becomes a sacred space where growth and transformation are possible. Strength in solitude also comes from the ability to find peace within ourselves. Often we look outward for happiness, fulfillment, or answers. But solitude reminds us that these things are not external, they are cultivated within. In solitude, we learn to be content with who we are, to appreciate our own company, and to draw strength from the quiet assurance that we are enough. Moreover, solitude prepares us to face the world with greater resilience. When we have spent time understanding ourselves and grounding our strength in something deeper, we are better equipped to handle the demands and pressures of life. Solitude is not withdrawal, it is renewal. It is a time to recharge, to refocus, and to emerge stronger and more confident. Far from being a weakness, solitude is a source of power. It allows us to grow, to listen, and to find clarity and peace. When embraced with courage and faith, solitude transforms us, equipping us to face life with a strength we never knew we possessed. Throughout the Bible, isolation emerges as a recurring theme in the lives of those chosen for great purposes. Far from being a sign of abandonment or punishment, these periods of solitude often served as transformative experiences, preparing individuals for the significant roles they were destined to play. The stories of biblical figures show that isolation can be a sacred space where God molds character, reveals his plans, and strengthens faith. Moses, one of the most prominent figures in Scripture, experienced profound isolation before becoming the leader of the Israelites. After fleeing Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian, tending sheep. This was a drastic change from his life in Pharaoh's palace, but it was in this solitude that Moses learned humility, patience, and dependence on God. When God called him from the burning bush to lead his people out of slavery, Moses was no longer the impulsive young man who acted on his own strength. Instead, he was a man who had been refined in the quiet, ready to trust in God's power and plan. David, too, encountered isolation before ascending to the throne of Israel. Anointed as a young shepherd, David spent years on the run from King Saul, hiding in caves and living as an outcast. These years of isolation were not wasted. In the wilderness, David developed his deep relationship with God, composing psalms that continue to inspire believers today. His solitude prepared him to be a king who relied on God's guidance rather than his own understanding. The lessons he learned in isolation shaped him into a leader after God's own heart. Even Jesus, the Son of God, embraced isolation at pivotal moments in his life. Before beginning his public ministry, Jesus spent 40 days alone in the wilderness, fasting and praying. This period of solitude was marked by testing, as Satan tempted him to abandon his mission. Yet Jesus emerged from the wilderness with unwavering focus and strength, ready to fulfill his purpose. Throughout his ministry, Jesus often withdrew to solitary places to pray, demonstrating the importance of seeking God in the quiet. Paul, one of the early church's most influential leaders, also experienced isolation. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul spent time in Arabia, away from the other apostles and the bustling activity of ministry. It was during this time that he deepened his understanding of the gospel and prepared for the mission of spreading Christianity to the Gentiles. His writings reflect the depth of wisdom and faith cultivated during these solitary years. These examples remind us that isolation is not a sign of God's absence, but a testament to his preparation. In solitude, God removes distractions, deepens faith, and equips his people for the challenges ahead. The wilderness, the cave, or the desert becomes a holy ground where transformation occurs. These stories encourage us to trust in God's timing, knowing that seasons of isolation are often the prelude to extraordinary purpose. Isolation often feels like a heavy burden, a season of loneliness and uncertainty that we struggle to understand. Yet isolation is not without purpose. It is a tool in the hands of God, used to prepare, refine, and strengthen us for the roles and challenges we are meant to face. What may seem like an empty and painful season is often the fertile ground where transformation takes root, leading us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and our purpose. In moments of isolation, we are stripped of the distractions that cloud our vision. The noise of daily life relationships, responsibilities, and constant activity can obscure our ability to hear God's voice and recognize his guidance. Isolation creates a space for stillness, where we are able to tune out the world and focus on the whisper of the divine. It is in this quiet that we begin to reflect, assess our lives, and discern what truly matters. These moments of introspection are crucial for realigning ourselves with God's purpose. The refining power of isolation cannot be underestimated. Just as gold is purified in fire, our character is often shaped in solitude. Isolation forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that need growth, our fears, insecurities, and weaknesses. Without the comfort of external validation or distraction, we are left to rely on God's strength and grace. This process, while uncomfortable, builds resilience and trust. It is here that we learn to let go of what holds us back and embrace the changes that prepare us for the next chapter of our lives. Isolation is also a time of preparation. Throughout history, God has used solitude to equip individuals for significant tasks. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading the Israelites out of Egypt. David, anointed as king, endured years of hiding and waiting before ascending to the throne. Even Jesus withdrew to solitary places to pray and prepare for his ministry. These moments of isolation were not wasted, they were seasons of growth and readiness. God often works behind the scenes during these times, aligning circumstances and strengthening us for the purpose he has set before us. Furthermore, isolation deepens our relationship with God. When the distractions of life are removed, we are drawn closer to him. It is in these moments that we learn to depend on his presence, to trust in his timing, and to find comfort in his promises. The intimacy formed in isolation becomes a wellspring of strength, carrying us forward even after the season of solitude ends. While isolation can feel like a time of loss, it is often a time of great gain. It is a sacred space where we are shaped, prepared, and aligned with God's purpose. When we emerge, we do so stronger, wiser, and more connected to the path set before us. The purpose of isolation is not to punish but to prepare, transforming us into vessels ready to carry out his plans. Trust the process, for the silence is where growth begins. Trust the process is a phrase that can feel like a lifeline during times of uncertainty, but it is also a challenge to our patience and faith. When we face difficulties or periods of isolation, it's easy to feel lost or question why we are in the current situation. Yet, trusting the process means embracing the journey even when the destination is unclear, knowing that every step, even the painful ones, serves a purpose in our growth. Trusting the process is rooted in the understanding that God is always at work, even when we don't see immediate results or answers. Life is not always a straightforward path. It is often full of twists, turns, delays, and detours. However, these moments are not random or without meaning. They are part of a greater plan, a divine timeline that is unfolding in ways we may not immediately understand. Trusting the process means having faith that, even in moments of doubt, God is in control and is using every experience to shape us into the people we are meant to become. One of the key aspects of trusting the process is surrendering the need for control. We are often tempted to force our own timelines, rushing through difficult seasons or trying to take shortcuts to avoid pain. But God's timing is perfect, and he knows when we are ready for the next step in our journey. Trusting the process requires us to release our grasp on how things should unfold and instead trust that God is guiding us in ways that are ultimately for our good. This doesn't mean that the road will be easy or free from hardship, but it does mean that every challenge we face is an opportunity for growth. The process also requires patience. It is easy to grow impatient when we don't see the results of our efforts right away. In times of struggle, it can be difficult to believe that anything good is coming from the pain. But just as a seed must be buried in the ground before it can sprout, growth often happens in the unseen moments. What appears to be a time of stagnation or frustration may actually be a season of preparation, where God is working in the background, aligning circumstances and strengthening our character. Another critical aspect of trusting the process is learning to embrace the lessons found in the journey. Growth is not just about reaching a destination, it is about the person we become along the way. Every setback, disappointment, or moment of failure carries with it the potential for growth and learning. When we trust the process, we are able to see the value in the small, everyday moments that build our character, resilience, and faith. It is through these experiences that we are prepared for the greater purpose ahead. Ultimately, trusting the process means having faith that there is a bigger picture at play. We may not always understand why certain things happen, but we can trust that God is working everything together for our good. In the waiting, in the uncertainty, and in the struggles, he is refining us and preparing us for the future he has planned. When we embrace the journey with faith and patience, we find peace in the process, knowing that each step brings us closer to the purpose we were created for.